Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 304 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mummy. I'm glad to have you with us. Hope everyone is healthy and safe and maybe reopening. I don't know. It is a wild and crazy time in the world, and it is certainly a wild and crazy time in the bar exam world. In this past week, we saw a rapidly changing environment continue to pick up speed. There were a ton of things that happened, and we're going to break it all down for you in today's episode of the podcast. My co-host, Megan Seo, will be joining me in just a few minutes. We'll take you through all the changes that we have as of now. We'll tell you what we think is going on. We'll make some predictions about where we think the test may be moving and some of the new features perhaps coming to the test. Maybe an open book essay exam, who knows? There's some interesting things going on. In any event, if this is your first time on the podcast with us, I want to welcome you. We're glad you found us. We come to you every week. At this point, typically on the weekends, we try to release just so we keep up with all of the changes that have happened during the prior week in terms of bar exam administration news. You can get these podcast episodes in a couple of different formats. If you'd like to watch the video, go to celebrationbarreview.com/304. And if you prefer to listen to the podcast, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, on iHeartRadio, radio.com, Spotify, and just about any place that podcasts are syndicated. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the information. In any event, no matter how you are consuming your podcast information, we do have a lot for you. And I want to let you know before we go into this update that we have a very special free training that's going on right now. It's called Now is the Best Time to Take the Bar Exam, Why You Should Ignore the Crowd and the Fear. Now, this webinar training was prepared in response to the changes that we saw coming for July, September, October of 2020 and beyond, and it's been an incredible hit. It's been very, very helpful for people. We will walk you through the current scenarios that we see, the strategy that we have for dealing with that, particularly if you're a repeat bar taker or a non-traditional bar student. And then we finish it up with a live 15-minute question and answer. And these question and answer sessions have been really valuable. You can ask any questions that you've got about jurisdictions or what's going on or just generally the strategy. And I love doing them. We're doing this webinar a couple of times a week, and you can register for it. It's easy to do. Just click on the button in the show notes or go to celebrationbarreview.com/now, and you can register. Now, the training takes just under an hour, but it could really change your thinking about what to do in terms of when and how to take the bar exam coming up. So I hope you'll join us for those training sessions. You can get all the details at celebrationbarreview.com/now. All right, well, let's go ahead and jump into our conversation that Megan and I held for our students late yesterday, talking about all of the changes that are going on in the bar exam for the upcoming fall. We should go ahead and turn to the news of the day and update everybody on what's going on with the different exams around the country. So why don't you kick us off, Megan, with where we stand?
All right, so we have a lot of changes since we had our last webinar last week. So I'm just going to go through these hopefully fairly quickly, but there are quite a few of them. And I think I'm taking them pretty much in alphabetical order. So if you're looking for a specific jurisdiction, just know that. Okay, so Alabama, they will be giving the July exam, they announced, and then they have a waiver that's, and this was kind of different, allowing any applicant for the July 2020 bar exam to participate as a student intern. So that one, I mean, do the double checking, because sometimes I feel like courts have, the bar examiners have made it sound broader and then the courts have narrowed it. So check, but as of right now, the language that they're reporting is any applicant for the July 2020 bar in Alabama can potentially get the the practice waiver. So that's different if that's what they end up sticking with, that broader language. That is different than we're seeing in some other jurisdictions.
Yeah, and I want to clarify that. I don't think someone's taken and failed the exam is necessarily going to get that waiver. Do you?
No. It's more that you might not have to be like someone who went to an Alabama school or
right.
Where sometimes we're seeing these really narrow practice waivers that are like very specific about,
Right. I think their practice waiver looks to be a bit broader, but yeah, just to clarify, none of these waivers, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think any single state is allowing anyone who has taken and failed the exam to take the practice waiver. And generally speaking, I haven't seen any state going back more than 2019 and 2020 law grads. So 2018 or earlier, I think you're not, even if you've never taken the bar exam, you're not going to be allowed. So if you took the bar exam in 1970, or if you graduated law school in 1975 and never took the bar exam, you're out of luck for sure. So,
all right. Then next we've got Colorado said that they are going to hold a July exam, but if they end up not being able to hold a July exam, then they'll do September 30th through October 1st. I find these interesting. There's kind of a rash of these where after the NCBE said we're holding the July exam, that we're seeing some states who are saying, okay, we're going to hold a July exam, but then still saying, but in case we can't, which to me is interesting because, we're in mid-May now. And so the window in my mind for when a state can have said we're doing a July exam and then change their mind seems to be closing somewhat rapidly. So it's a little interesting.
Yeah, it is. And no one, very few states have set a deadline by which they say we're absolutely making a complete decision. So I think we're going to be in flux for a long period of time, right?
Yeah, right. Because the closer that we get to these, we're starting to have a lot of law schools are starting to be done for the year. So 3Ls have graduated and people are starting to really get into their studies. And we still have states who are saying, well, maybe we're going to give it in July, but we're not promising anything. Or we have these contingency plans. So so we'll keep our eyes on that. Okay, Delaware does a state exam, but just in case anyone needs to know that, they do have a 2.5-day exam, so they've decided to do no July exam. They're doing September 9th through the 11th. Then Kansas, which is UBE, they had been saying they were going to do September 9th through 10th if needed, and the Kentucky court has just ordered both the July exam and the 9th through 10th exam date.
Is that Kansas or Kentucky?
Kansas.
Kansas, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're going to do 2 exams in Kansas, kind of the Kansas-Nebraska deal, right? We'll give it twice. I'm wondering, with Kansas being a UBE jurisdiction, is this a jurisdiction where people might be looking to get into?
Administrations. Thing about prioritization there. So in my mind, if there is an exam, a state where they're giving more than one exam and they're not talking yet about prioritization, that would indicate to me that, go for it. If you live somewhere near Kansas and you could get there fairly easily, maybe it's worth trying. We don't know. We have seen states change their mind and start to implement prioritization, but until they do that, it's fair game, and then they can implement it obviously, and then they'll refund you if they end up kicking you out of the jurisdiction. But it's kind of a mess. But Kansas is one that has not said that they're prioritizing their own in-state students or recent grads.
Okay.
Then similarly, Kentucky, they had said that they were going to do September if there was no July exam, but the court now has ordered there to be both. So they're going to do a July exam and they're going to do September 30th through October 1st.
That's a trend. That's a trend we saw in a lot of states this week, which I think must mean that they're just deciding that by splitting into 2 exams, they just reduce the pressure on the number of people sitting at one time, right?
Yeah. And so what I find interesting, and this is just my own kind of, I'm curious to see what ends up happening. I've had a lot of questions about, well, can I just, let's say you live in Kentucky, can I just apply for both? Can I apply for the July and the September? We are seeing in a lot of states that are doing multiple exams that they're putting you in one camp or the other. So they're not allowing that. And I would assume that will be the case everywhere, because the point of this presumably is to spread out the number of applicants to 2 exams so that they have half the number of people taking the exam each time. So I really doubt we're going to see anywhere that would let you sit twice.
Yeah, I think if I were being super cautious right now, and I'm looking at my own personal calendar, I would block off July 28th and 29th. I would also block off September 9th and 10th, and I would block off September 30th and October 1st, just on the possibility that your exam could get moved, or the examiners could do what you were just saying, Megan, and they could say, we've decided to split it up and you get put into this other date. And I think that people need to have that flexibility, or at least know about it, or be planning for that possibility, right? I mean, you can't buy plane tickets, but, nobody's flying anyway. So, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, definitely keep all the dates open, because these are like this, that Kentucky had said one thing and then the state court ruled actually differently. So it's not enough, I think, to say, oh, well, my state said that this is when they're giving the exam. We're seeing states now change what they had been saying previously. So definitely none of this is written in stone at all.
I see we're getting questions about individual states. Just want everybody to know we're going alphabetically. So those of you asking for questions about W's, just be cool.
Yeah, right. What I'm also doing as I'm seeing this, okay, so like Leslie and Tadios, these questions about Missouri and Wisconsin, neither one of those states made any changes this week from our last one. So I'm not talking about those specifically, because I'm sure you can understand I cannot go through all 50 states every week. So like Leslie, if they said they're doing July, and if they can't, then September 9th and 10th, then that's the latest that they've said. So stick with that. We will update when they update, but that's the latest.
Yeah, and let me just say, on our website, there is a link in the menu that says July 2020 exam changes. We keep that up to date every day. You could always go to that site and check out the links and the links to the court orders in those states, and that's where you're going to find the latest information. So
and for Wisconsin, they have said nothing, and so anyone who said nothing means that they're just plowing ahead, presumably with the July exam and no changes. But they haven't said anything at all specifically about it. So okay. So next we've got Louisiana. That's a state exam also, but I wanted to highlight it because this was an interesting. So they canceled the July exam, but now they're doing they called it canceling the July exam, but what they're doing is a one-day exam on July 27th and a one-day exam on October 10th. And they're going to do prioritization for that. So yes, yet another permutation. The October 10th date is a completely new date that we've never seen. But basically by making it a one-day exam, presumably they are just another state that is severing their reliance on the NCBE and just saying, we're going to write our own test and we can pick any date we want.
Yeah, Louisiana doesn't use the multi-state, so they can do that. They're the only state really that had that freedom, and they certainly took advantage of it. But we're seeing some other states that were part of the other 49 that were part of the multi-state that might be severing away, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well.
So definitely seeing some of those states that are just finding it easier to completely do their own thing regardless. Yeah. It is easier. They can just make their own decision rather than have to wait for the NCBE to work with them or not. Okay, then next we've got Maine. So this is good news. They put out, the board subsequently announced the availability of a limited number of additional seats and a 3-tiered application period for those who are not already on the seating list. So Maine was a state who last week had said they were closed, and now they have said that I don't know if they found an additional venue or what happened, but they have said they're open again. So if you are in the New England area and you'd like to try to take the UBE in Maine, just go on their website and figure out with the tier system how you fit into that, and if that might be a possibility for you.
Yeah, and again, these tiers are different, from state to state. So we can't, we're not going to do a deep dive and tell you what the tiers are in Maine, because they're different than somewhere else. So just going to have to check it out.
Yep. Okay, then Ohio announced that they are not giving a July exam. They have changed to September 9th and 10th, plus an expanded practice waiver. So that's another UBE state. So that could be a possibility. We're kind of seeing a lot of these Midwest Rust Belt kind of states who are saying that they're sticking with the UBE and they are giving multiple exam dates. So if you are in that area, I do think you've got, at least right now, you've got some options. So that's good.
Yep.
Oklahoma is a state exam, and they said they're not going to make any changes. They're plowing on as normal. And then Tennessee, they announced prioritization. So I did want to just talk through how they're doing the prioritization. I know we have some Tennessee students, and this is a new way I've seen of doing prioritization. So first is Tennessee law schools, graduates of Tennessee law schools who've never taken the bar. Second is graduates of Tennessee law schools who failed one time. Third is graduates of Tennessee law schools who failed 2 times, then 3, then 4, then 5, and so on. If they fill all those spots with graduates of Tennessee law schools, then they will open it up presumably to non-Tennessee law school grads. I cannot imagine that will happen, that they will get that deep into it. But they will, that's just something to keep in mind. If you were planning on taking the Tennessee bar and you did not graduate from a Tennessee law school, I would not assume that you can take the exam until February 2021.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, it raises this, they're doing 2 tests in Tennessee, right? Yeah. Two test dates. And I think, again, you're going to get just moved between those 2. I don't think you're going to necessarily get a choice. It raises really fascinating questions about how they're going to scale and score the exams. The July exam should be finished, the July exam should be scored and in the books before the second administration. And it's just an open question. Will they hold all the results and release them at one time? Will they do the first group's results first? If you failed the first time, could you potentially roll over to that September test date? Will they equate the 2 exams? These are all highly geeked out questions that keep me awake at 3 a.m, but there are no answers. It's not because they're not thinking about it, I'm sure, but no one's announced what they're doing.
Yeah, some states have announced that they are planning on releasing results like separate. So there'll be a results release date for the July exam and then another one for after the September exam. But not every state has said what they're doing with that. And like I said, I wouldn't bank on assuming that you could take the July, get your results, and if you failed, then take the September. I just don't think they're going to let you do that.
Well, again, since the theory is they want to reduce the number of people in each administration, I think that would be correct. So whether you took July or either of the September dates, if you were not successful, I think then you'd be looking at February 2021.
Yeah, which really is the same thing you would normally be looking at. Yeah. I would. Yeah. That's not really a setback in my mind. Okay, and then we've got Washington State. They announced July plus September 9th through 10th. So Washington State, I feel like before they were just doing the July exam.
They were, yes, that's right, which seemed weird. Yes, very weird.
A lot of states doing this, adding an additional exam. States who, as of a week ago, were still saying, just the July, we're fine, are now saying, okay, maybe we need to get. And I think it comes with the greater understanding of, as things open back up, the key is to keep the numbers of people really down, numbers of people together. And unfortunately, the bar exam has to be given indoors, which is the most dangerous situation. So states are trying to find ways to keep the numbers as low as they can get them. So that's what we're seeing with that. Now, the one note that I want to make, and I didn't have this in my main state updates because it's not official yet, is Nevada. Sorry. They have proposed an open book exam in Nevada. So they will not, under this proposal, they would not do the multiple choice at all. Instead, they would have an open book online 2-day 8 essay question exam. They'd have time limitations, and then they'd have a Nevada MPT question as well. So we will keep our eyes on that and let you guys know. This is would be really interesting experiment. I don't know how you proctor online and open book exam because part of the online proctoring is theoretically about watching where your eyes are going and your hands, and are you looking at other materials or things like that. And if you're allowed to look at other materials, I don't know how you prevent people from using pre-written things, or
I don't either. Yeah, the pre-written part really is what scares me. We had an interesting conversation offline, Megan and I did, about this, and I know, Megan, you're a proponent of, this looks more like what real lawyering is like, and I agree. It's not about memorization, and I think it supports that position that we've held for years, which is the bar exam is not about what you memorize; it's about how you use what you know. And this feels a lot like the cadre of law school professors who give open book exams in their classes, because they say under time conditions, even if you've got all your notes, bring all your notes in with you, but you're not going to be able to get through them quickly enough to answer the question. And so could the questions conceivably be much longer and much more complex so that even though it's open book, it wouldn't do you any good? I really don't know. It also means moving off of, the sort of the traditional kinds of questions that we would see in the exam, but Nevada's not a UBE jurisdiction. So I guess in that context, they could probably break away. And that's what we're seeing. Nevada, Indiana, California, these are states that are not UBE. So they've got a little more flexibility about what they want to do on the state part of the exam. And then I think the rest of this is their recognition. I think we're seeing this. You tell me what your take is. I think what we're seeing is that the state bar examiners are reaching the same conclusion that we've reached, which is the national conference is not likely to do an online multi-state in this July fall period, right? And so they're trying to find some alternative to that.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's everybody's trying to make lemonade out of lemons and do the best with what they've got and recognize it's one administration of the exam. So they have to jettison the multiple choice portion. I think they're just kind of figuring, look, it's better than not giving it at all. So so we're just starting to see more and more of these states who are saying, look, any tether that I had to the NCBE, we're just going to cut it at least for July or September, and then we can revisit it in February. But they would rather have the freedom to allow in a lot of cases, their recent grads who've never taken the bar the chance to become attorneys in the state rather than have to throw their hands up in the air and say, I guess we're not giving it at all because we are dependent on the NCBE to provide us with online testing, which is...
Yeah, and that's really, it comes really down to this idea of online. I mean, the national conference has said, to be clear, that they will do 3 administrations of the test. They'll do July, they'll do September 9th, they'll do September 30th. So as long as you're in one of those 3 test dates, or all 3 as a state, you will have access to the multi-state bar exam, the multi-state essay exam, and the multi-state performance test. There doesn't seem to be any question about that. Yeah. The problem is for those states like California that are starting to talk about an online test, can the national conference put any or all of their materials online? And the answer today is about the same as it was a week or 2 weeks ago, and that is maybe, but probably not. It is a massive challenge to put the multi-state online because not every state would do that. And so there's an equity problem and there's a security problem. And it's not that they can't throw it up on a screen and say, here you go, and start the timer. It's not technically complex that way, but it raises all of these other problems of security and fairness that just, when you've got a closed sandbox, a closed universe like the national conference does, and you suddenly blow it open, that is terrifying, right? Because maybe you've blown up the entire MBE if something goes wrong. And that's a risk I'm just not sure the national conference is willing to take. And I know that California is the 900-pound gorilla here, and they say, well, do it our way or you lose us. And that's a big club to wield. But even at that, the bar examiners didn't jump up and down and say, sure, we'll do it. I mean, they're saying we'll look at it, but maybe we won't. And so, we go there. I had an interesting question with a student today who was talking about California. And she has historically handwritten her exams, I guess, in the past. And she said, will I be able to handwrite an online exam? And I think the answer is no. I think this is totally a typewritten exam if it's a essay exam, whether it's California or any place else that's doing, so Nevada, for example. But I don't think they're not bringing blue books to your door,
Right.
So I think you're going to be typing.
What's hard and what some states are having to balance is really that for them, like for California, it's not a question of, do we give it online, but then if the MBE won't or the NCBE won't budge, then we do it in person. LA County just extended their stay-at-home orders through the summer. And so, I took it in LA County along with thousands of other people.
Millions, yes. And
they are legally could not even get people together in a room to take it. And so it's really, they really are facing, some of these states are facing, we either have to do it online or we can't do it until February. And so I think that's where you say, look, well, California's trying to kind of wield its weight, throw its weight around a bit with the NCBE and say, come on, like, we're going to give you 8,000 people put it online for us. But if that doesn't work, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, but presumably California could just say, we're just not doing the multiple choice portion of the exam this year, or we're writing our own, or whatever that looks like. Because for them, it's a bit catastrophic to say, well, then we cannot give it. And you certainly can't flood counties that have been less impacted by coronavirus in California with people from all the highly impacted counties. So, it's just a hard, I think for a lot of them, they feel like it's kind of a no-win proposition. So you try and do the best you can with a really bad situation and figure out.
And I want to make this final point about California. You should be studying the multi-state as well as the California subject. Do not skip multi-state.
They're also multi-state. So 100%, there's no world in which you don't need to know evidence or property.
So, I've gotten that question from some people this week. Like, well, can I skip that? No. No, don't do that. Once we know what the exact exam is, we can offer some guidance. But for right now, study as though it's the regular bar exam, because it'll be going back to the regular bar exam, I think, at the very least. So we'll start with that.
And everything's changing constantly. So definitely do not skip anything because you're gambling that it won't be there. Yeah, no, definitely don't do that.
So California's a big state. Let's talk about Florida. What's happening with Florida?
There. So nothing changed about Florida since last week. But I know we've gotten some questions, and Sylvia put in the chat box here, any information on what Florida will consider proof of 14-day quarantine prior to the July exam?
Well, I don't know. That's a great question. I mean, what they've said is they're going to screen you before you walk into the test center and into the room. They're going to ask questions. They're going to say, when did where do you live? Well, we look at your address. How long have you been in Florida? Did you self-quarantine? Are you willing to affirm that you self-quarantined? Take your temperature, ask, what your health situation is. I don't know the answer, obviously, at this point. They haven't been more explicit about what they're going to do. I would hate to be somebody that arrives 7 days before the exam and is in the position of having to lie to the examiners as you walk into the room. And I would never encourage that. So I think you should assume you've got a 14-day self-quarantine, even if you're coming from not New York. There's the New Yorkers. We got state troopers on the highway, on I-95 at the border, and on I-10 at the border from Louisiana. So, not that's, I know my geography better than that. There are states between Louisiana and Florida, but I knew I could see that look in your eyes. Yeah, I knew it was coming. Okay. There's a couple of states in between there, like Mississippi and Alabama. But the point is they are not letting people across the border in Florida, even though we're going to a more relaxed situation. So I think you got to assume if you're going to take the Florida exam in July, you're going to be told where to go, Tampa or Orlando. And if you are not a Florida resident, you need to come to Florida for 14 days in advance. So if you got friends or neighbors or, Disney Vacation Club, come and use it. I don't know. It's weird. And they're the only state that's been specific about their health screening, but I don't think they'll be the only state ultimately that talks about it. I think they're just sort of setting the pace for everybody else.
Right.
So that's Florida. And, could Florida add another test date? Maybe. Could they move this one back? Maybe. Will they be moved by what the governor does? Probably not. Will they be moved by what the Florida courts say? Probably not. Florida bar examiners are an independent entity and they operate in their own world. So everybody just sort of fasten your seatbelts and let's see what happens there. And then I think the other state we just got to talk about for a minute is New York. In New York, we're still, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're still in the application period for the priority New York bar takers, right?
Today is the last day of that. Yeah.
Okay. So when that closes, I think the next thing we're going to find out is, are there seats available? Like there were seats available in Maine or some other places. And then we go to the next tier of the priority, but who knows? The reality is if you're a repeat bar taker, you're probably not going to sit in New York this fall or summer. If you're a foreign trained attorney, you're almost certainly not going to be able to do that. And so you should be looking at other jurisdictions where you could sit in the UBE. And I think that's what New York is really saying is, look, go somewhere else in the UBE. You don't have to take the test here physically to be a member of the New York bar. So I want to we keep saying it. We keep getting the question. People keep taking that New York state of mind and saying, if I'm not in New York, I can't take the exam. No, there are other states you can go to, but you have to check your legal credentials and your situation and your character and fitness and the timing and the deadlines. So there may be opportunities for you. There may not. I mean, worst case is you're going to sit till February 2021, but hopefully you're studying in anticipation of that. So we'll know some more. I think, at this moment, New York is still closed out until they get through this first period. And then I would expect some announcement probably on Monday as to what they're going to do. So we'll see what that is.
Yeah. And one last thing, we had a question from a student who's going back to Florida, just worried about coming in Florida from out of state and the 14-day quarantine and all the extra expenses and all the kind of chaos that comes along with that if you're planning, with Florida not being a UBE state. And I would just say, and it's a broad message for everyone, I think, the worst case scenario is that you can't take the exam until February of 2021. That is not that long from now. And you do need to, I know we talked about this last week, you do need to stop and think and really assess for yourself, what is my life situation like? Am I really that worse off if I have to wait till February? Because I think you need to be smart about it. If you're trying to take the exam in Florida and you are going to spend thousands of dollars because you have to go and stay in a hotel room for 2 weeks before the exam even starts, if the stress of that, if being away from work, from your family, whatever it is astronomical, stop and really assess for yourself. Does it make that big of a difference if I take it in February instead? Yeah. So it's just for everything. Everybody's kind of, when you're getting panicky about, well, now I got to fly to Maine and I live in Southern California, but maybe not. Just stop and think about whether or not the decision you're making makes sense for you, for your family, for your work, for your job, and recognize that the bar exam will be given again normally. It will happen. We can't promise when that's going to be, but it will happen. And so you don't have to kill yourself to get an exam done right now if it's really not working.
Yeah, and I think that reflects who our audience is, right? I mean, we're talking to adults and repeat bar takers, foreign trained attorneys, and not a lot of 3Ls. If you're a 3L, and you've never taken the bar exam before, you're in a different world, and there are plenty of states that are offering you limited waivers so that you don't have to take the exam in the middle of all this craziness. And for that group of people, they probably should sit out. And then we'll see you, in a year or two when you realize that sitting in a big box bar review for 8 weeks is not something you can do while you've got a job. But the reality is that for most of our students, this is exactly what you just said, Megan. You've got to use common sense here. If you can sit for the exam, if it works out for you in July or September 9th or September 30th, by all means take it because we think the grading will be favorable. But if you can't, or if it doesn't work out, or if it's beyond your economic situation, don't stress over it. Just move the date back. You're not going to pay anything extra for our course. There are no restrictions for deferrals or retakes or any of that. So you're good. We've made it as simple as possible. Our answer to everything is yes. So there you go. June loves it. It's like, what's my answer? Yes. The answer is yes. Whatever you want to do, yes, we can do that. So I think that people need to take a breath, obviously, and just sort of recognize that now that we've gotten the NCBE's decision, so that happened, and then the dominoes started to fall a little bit the week before and a lot this week. I expect next week will be another of those weeks as we begin to get some clarity about what's happening. Because as you said, the closer we get to the July date, states just have to make some decisions. So, we'll see what happens. So I think, does that bring us pretty well up to date on the world of coronavirus and the bar exam?
Yes.
I think, as we look at where we are today, and where we're going over the next week or so, there's still going to be more changes, right? I mean, we can be assured of that. Everyone should continue to study. You should continue to work as you can. If you're trying to find a jurisdiction, keep at that. We can't give you individualized assistance about that. We're not allowed to do that, but stay informed, do the best you can, and recognize, I think, what you said earlier, Megan, if you have to wait till February, okay. It's not the worst thing that could happen. Not great, but it's not the worst thing that could happen. And if you can take that attitude to this, then I think that you're going to be more at peace with everything that goes on and less rocked back and forth by the noise and the distraction and the disruption. And there is a lot of that, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, there's just a lot of noise. That's a good way of putting it. And so you just keep your nose down and keep working, keep studying. And this is all going to shake out, and we don't even know yet what that's going to look like, but we're going to continue to update you as we do know what it looks like. And we're holding everything, really gently, like sand in our hands, knowing the more we try to fight it, the more sand falls through our hands. So we're just holding it lightly, and we're going to present you guys with the information we have and just encourage you to also hold it lightly and to keep perspective with this.
Absolutely. Perspective is great.
And, we will be there for you whenever you are able to take your next exam. We're going to be there. So don't worry about that.
I'm not allowed to leave the house. So, there you go. But thank you for all of the kind wishes that you send our way to all of us. It means a lot to us to hear that you're thinking about us as well. So we really do want everyone to stay healthy and safe. And we'll be back next Friday. We'll have Georgia results out on Friday, the 22nd, at some point during the day, hopefully before we get to our webinar. I think that is the last big jurisdiction remaining out there for results. So good luck to those waiting on those results. And we will see all of you next Friday. Thanks, Megan. Appreciate it, everybody, for being here. And we'll see you again on episode for this week. I hope it was helpful for you. I want to remind you that if your head is spinning a little bit with all these dominoes that are beginning to fall, probably mixing my metaphors there. In any event, if you are just trying to figure out what to do, we want to invite you to our free webinar training program. Now is the best time to take the bar exam. You can register by clicking on the button here on the show notes for the video or in the audio page, or by going to celebrationbarreview.com/now. Remember, there's a 15-minute live Q&A session at the end of every one of these training webinars, and they're really valuable, and I hope you'll join me for that. All right, everybody, I hope you are doing well. Hang in there, stay healthy, stay safe, keep studying, and we will see you next week along the Extra Mile.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.